we go. How about this?
Yes, there you go. That's
Thank
perfect.
you. I'm
Perfect.
still a student, still learning after all these years. Anyway, good morning, everyone. I'm used to presenting locally, and I thought, thank you, Laura, for letting me do this. So I thought we'd try it on this level. Anyway, um, so just take it from the top, standard operating procedures, and a little bit about me. Yesterday was 47 years since taking my private pilot check ride, and I'm still learning. So, standard operating procedures, just what they refer to in the business. Let me see, and it shows a few type ratings. I've been fortunate to fly Citation, Learjet, and B-25 and the DC-3, all a lot of fun. So, I originally did this presentation 3 years ago for the El Monte IMC Club, and so I've updated it for this one. So, what are standard operating procedures? Purpose is to ensure that the airplane is flown according to, manufacturer's guidelines. So adherence to that, promoting safety, efficiency, and aircraft resources and functionality. Um, so it'll vary by the airplane that you're in, but these are standard. This is the way everybody operates. It's airline, charter, professionally, corporate, things like that. And is this going to work? Okay, here we go. So. And when you get to the airline level, the reason these are so environment important are at a two-pilot crew. You might have two pilots matched up, especially with the airline level, that don't know each other because you've got thousands of pilots. So with SOPs, everyone knows what to expect from the other person. So you say hi, introduce yourself, but you both know from which seat what your procedures are for normal, abnormal, and emergency. So that's the advantage of it, and this has been, evolved over time. A little bit of some research here. Some users of the NAS, National Airspace System, some users live by these, some do not. Military, airline, corporate, typically they do. And this is arguably the most significant difference between air carriers and general aviation when it comes to training. And when I'm training my clients, and I should say that I'm a independent contractor for an outfit, professional instrument courses throughout Connecticut. I travel to the client, train the client in their airplane, so it's for owner pilots. My biggest challenge in this job is that different airplanes for everyone, and everyone has different avionics, different panel. So I have to do my homework every time to learn what everyone has, and I'm learning what I call the Garmin alphabet, um, because all the Garmin designations are a little bit different. So I get to learn something new every time. And in fact, last week I was in Fargo, North Dakota, training somebody for 5 days. I'm back home now, and I return next week to finish them up. So it's accelerated training, typically for busy professionals who don't have time to get the training traditionally. So they hire someone who comes to them where they are, and they allow the time, block out the time to do this. So, SOPs versus personal minimums. Everyone should have their personal minimums when you don't want to fly, when you do want to fly. Um, but SOPs take it to a higher level, as we're going to see here. We go back. So, anyway, the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee defines it this way. As you can see here, personal minimums, an individual set of procedures, and you might want to have personal minimums that are very high. If you don't fly a lot, you might want to say, clear skies or maybe 1,003 VFR. If you fly regularly and you're on top of the game, you might feel more comfortable with going down to, 401 or something like that. So depending on you, the airplane you fly, the weather, what are you comfortable with, and that sort of thing. That's really how it works. And neglecting to use these has been the common difference between, scheduled and not scheduled 121, 135, and Part 91, things like that. As they've examined accidents over the years, the lack of adequate procedures, policies, or checklists, lack of adherence to procedures has contributed to accidents. How many accidents come to mind? Several, when the crew deviated from things and got away from standard procedures. Then that's why we practice in simulators, running through emergencies and all that kind of thing. So it makes a difference. And advisory circulars, they're neither binding nor regulatory, but they have the effect of spelling out what to do and how to do it. So, and here we have, let me see if I can move this. So, before the flight, and a lot of this is what I would call common sense, but if you haven't seen it before, maybe it's not for you. So, anyhow, pre-flight items, it could range from days before the flight. What's your procedure for checking weather? If you're flying for hire, uniform, dress code, what time you show up, how much time to allow for things, who does the pre-flight, what's spelled out, regulations, aircraft manuals, company manuals, all this kind of thing. But and you might have, depending on where you're flying and what you're flying, whatever routine that you have. We all have some kind of routine. Let's see, is this going to advance? This is a big one. Are your devices and avionics ready? Is there any updates for ForeFlight or your Garmin or whatever EFB you're using? The onboard avionics, is it up to date, the latest database? You don't want to have that changed in the middle of a trip somewhere. So just making sure everything you have is up to date. Um, it's happened that things don't get updated. Here we get into single pilot cockpit resource management, also known as SRM, and and this is in the FAA's Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. So the art and science of managing resources. And actually, this includes not just yourself, air traffic control, line boys, passengers, everyone that, helps with a flight, resources that you're not always aware of. And now with advanced avionics, there's so much more information, learning how to use it to help. So managing automation, and that's a big thing to deal with now with general aviation because there's so much automation depending on the airplane, avionics, autopilot, no autopilot, knowing how to use the autopilot, limitations, all these different things. There's a lot to consider so that when you're very busy on an approach, things continue to move, smoothly along. So, and then identifying risks here, hazard and risk. So depending on your experience level, what you're flying, how it's equipped, what the weather is, all of these things make a difference, and it's case by case situation. So if you're flying an RV-7, it's different than if you're flying a Bonanza, different than if you're flying a TBM or something like that. Each aircraft has its own limitations, and depending on a pilot's experience level and the recency of experience, how current you are, it's going to be different every time. So they start before the flight. I found this picture of an old decrepit Cherokee. What's the condition of your airplane? How's the weather? Is everything on your airplane working? All of that. How's the weather and the forecast, long range and everything. So all of that can start days before, depending on where you're going to go, your mission, how capable is the airplane, winter versus summer, many different things to consider. Is the airplane airworthy, as mentioned? Maintenance squawks. When was the last annual? Does anyone do a VOR check anymore? ADs and the pilot, are you safe following the I'm safe before the flight? So going down the list, hopefully you're not stressed, dealing with, life situations. So in good health, on top of your game, good night's sleep, not fatigued, no pressure to get there, things of that nature. They all make a difference. How do you check the weather? There are so many ways to check the weather now. I still call Leidos now and then and talk to them, get a personal briefing, 1-800 weather brief, ForeFlight, all the different EFB tools, Garmin. There are so many now, and knowing how to interpret the weather, current weather, forecast weather, weather charts, the surface analysis, weather depiction chart, all of that. So whether you use a device and And then also your go and no-go criteria, again, based on your experience, your comfort level. If you're flying regularly, it's going to be different than if you don't fly very often. Take the published minimums. Do you double that? So if it's a 200 and a half, would you double that up to 401? Or would you be more comfortable with 1,003? Or you want good VFR, or maybe 5,000 foot ceiling and 10-mile visibility? What works for you? What works for the airport you're going to? If you're going to a, airport that's got really good facilities, you know, long runways, ILS approaches or RNAV approaches, that's one thing. If you're going to a small rural airport with maybe no approach in a remote area, that would be entirely different. So it all depends on you, your passengers, time of day, season, all those kind of things. And then, when was the last time you looked in your manual for, performance? So, and everyone presents, manufacturers present performance differently. Sometimes it's what they call spaghetti charts, up, over, across. Sometimes it's a table like this. So, how much runway is available? How much runway do you need? What NOTAMs are there? That's really important for IFR. Runway closures, what has changed with in the instrument flying system? I mean, MDAs, decision heights, minimums can change, missed approach procedures, navigate outages, and right now in the LA Basin, there's 4 VORs that are out of service, depending on where you are, where you're flying, what's working, what's not, and do a, GPS. How many satellites? Are there any that aren't working? For IFR, is there an obstacle departure procedure? How do you depart your airport if there's no published departure procedure or something like that? Airplane, check the AFM. So just all the facts that you need to determine if you can depart safely. Checklist. This is all aircraft specific. So your checklist and your POH or AFM. AFMs are specific to the aircraft with a serial number. But anyway, this all depends simply on your aircraft. And dealing with interruptions during a checklist. Typically, on the ground before start, all kinds of interruptions. Some airline SOPs call for you to start over if you get interrupted on a checklist, so you don't skip anything, for real. And, checking on fuel, passengers, baggage, whatever it might be. The longest checklists are used on the ground. When you're in flight, they are shorter. So just making sure that you don't get interrupted, and if something does happen beyond your control, start over, and that way you don't miss anything. And then we have what we call, is it a do list or versus a checklist? If you're new to an airplane, you're going to go step by step, spend time in the cockpit, learn where all the switches, button, knobs are, and learn what we call a flow. Where does your hands go? Where does your vision go as you're looking around? Is it, if there's an overhead panel, anything up there? Is it top to bottom, left to right? What's on the floor, fuel selectors, wherever it might be, whatever it is, knowing what you're going to do, and even for emergencies, what's the flow? So how is it going to go? And every airplane is going to be a little bit different there. Of course, especially, gosh, if they're home built, experimental modifications, all kinds of things to know about for your airplane. And I'll say new cockpit designs are better than old, and that regarding human factors. And here, don't rush. And this is called the expectation bias. I took a course many years ago, and they put this sign up that, and it took several attempts reading it before we realized that it says Paris in the spring. Your brain thinks, oh, it's Paris in the spring. Same way when you're looking at your landing gear, you put the gear down, maybe there's 2 green lights, but you're expecting 3. So you see 3 green lights, you think, but not 2 green lights. So knowing what you're looking at, and in a high stress situation, you might not see it correctly. If you're a Part 91 pilot, you can make a change to a checklist. If you're flying for hire, Part 135, Part 121, you cannot change the checklist. So hopefully the checklist for the airplane you're flying makes sense. It's a logical flow. But for Part 91 pilots, you can make a change to a checklist, especially obviously if it's an experimental or home build. But if it's operated for hire, FAA approved, then you cannot change the checklist. So what works for you? Your IFR clearance. So this is important. You want to get your clearance before you taxi, unless you call ATC, call clearance delivery. They say clearance on request. They don't have it, they're going to request it. You could request taxi to the run-up area and get it there. But what you don't want to do is try to copy it down while you're taxiing. When you're taxiing, the only thing you should do is be driving the airplane, watching for traffic, making sure you're observing all the signage, etc. So, and with the temptation to program your avionics, that's a huge risk that you don't want to be doing while you're in motion. And especially in a two-pilot crew, they don't do this while they taxi. They do it while the airplane is stationary. So get the clearance, whether you write it down, put it on your EFB, but then you got to program it depending on what avionics you have. So do this while the airplane is stationary. Do not try to do this while you're moving. Too much a chance to become distracted, and then bad things happen. So watching where you're going, bad things like roaming incursion when you cross a hold short line. Oh no. So anyway, just some things to consider. There's a lot here. Um, Everyone's got a different cockpit, depending on what you're flying. How is it set up? What works for you? And gosh, with people putting iPads or Android devices, where do you put it so it's not blocking your view? Do you put it on the side? Some are attached to a cockpit, the window on the side. Some are putting it, in the center. I hold mine on my little 150 on my knee, or my leg, but where do you put it so it's out of the way and you can see what you need to see? And then your avionics. It's such an individual thing. What do you have? How's it set up? PFD, MFD, iPad, Android. What works for you? And then when you're using it, the device, trying to get the fewest number of taps on the screen to get to where you want to go. Somebody came up with what they call the three-tap rule, because as you're flying along and you're on an approach, you don't have time to go, where is this? So you want to make it the fewest number of taps to get where you need it. Avionics, depending on what you have, how do you have it loaded? What do you need to do? What is a logical flow that's going to work for you? And personalize your checklist so that you address everything. Like I say, individual. Seen many different things with many clients I've flown with. So simpler is better if you can do it. Taxi. Complete start and taxi checklist before taxi. The only thing on taxi would be checking that the ball turn bank is working properly. But really, in my days of flight safety in the sim, we did the taxi checklist before we taxied. It would be a distraction otherwise. Have the airport diagram out, especially if you're at an unfamiliar airport. If you're at your home airport, you know what to expect typically, unless maybe the excuse me, winds have changed and suddenly someday they're going the other way. But Long Beach typically is 3-0. But if the Santa Anas are blowing, it might change. And if they run east traffic, everything slows down a bit. So what's expected taxi route? Try to anticipate that, know what to expect, write it down, whatever shorthand, read it back, and draw it out if you need to. And gosh, you could highlight it in ForeFlight. So anyway, know what to expect, and don't be distracted when you're taxiing. You just drive an airplane on the ground at a reasonable speed so that if you have to stop, you can stop and, not lurch forward and strike the proper something. So 5 to 10 knots. And anyway, just at a safe speed where you can bring it to a stop and not being distracted with anything else. So minimizing distractions, no checklists, stereo cockpit. If you're not familiar, this resulted from an accident back in the 70s. Somebody will correct me. PSA was flying LA to San Diego. They had a jump seat on a 727. They had traffic called out to them. They didn't see it. There was a midair collision. They had unnecessary conversation in the cockpit. And out of that accident investigation, they came up with the concept sterile cockpit. So at the airline level, and I'll say charter corporate, no unnecessary conversation on during taxi, takeoff, landing below 10,000 feet. Above 10,000 feet, you can talk as you need to, but below it, checklist responses or calling out traffic, only essential conversation. No unnecessary conversation. That's made a huge difference. Um, Maintaining center line, yes, as colleague Brian Schiff says, center line is for professionals. So staying that guarantees your wingtips are clear. You're not going to, get too close to anything. And this is a thing from the airline level that many GA pilots don't do. But when you're taxiing, taxi landing lights on for taxi, turn them off when stopped or holding short. So this might be an additional thing to think about, but many of my clients that fly, Pipers and that they or whatever aircraft, they just leave the taxi light on, but we would turn the taxi light on when you're in motion, turn it off when you've stopped. That way other aircraft know that when the lights are off, you're not moving forward. So anyway, just a suggestion. And when you're in the run-up pad, I will say, if you have strobes, turn them off in the run-up pad so you're not distracting other aircraft, especially at night, because it can be very distracting to pilots on final approach. And again, landing light off if you're in the run-up or holding short of the runway. That way you're not distracting pilots on final approach, just the nav lights. These are suggestions. Before takeoff, so depending whether you're one or two pilots, you brief as necessary. And a question, do you have a takeoff briefing? And bigger aircraft, larger, turbo, multi-engine and jets, of course, the airline crews brief every takeoff. In other words, what to do if something goes wrong, uh, the departure, whatever it might be. So anyway, that way you're ready. You don't have time to say, what do we do now? So um, calling out, confirming the correct runway. And if you're not familiar with the Comair accident, how many years ago was this? In the 80s, Lexington, Kentucky, the crew was flying a Canada regional jet. They were very distracted taxiing to the runway, and they were talking about everything except what was going on. They taxied to the wrong runway. There was one controller in the tower. He was busy doing paperwork. The taxi clearance was very routine. The crew did not go to the correct runway. In fact, they departed on a VFR runway not lighted. They were accelerating down the runway and didn't realize this till at rotation, and the co-pilot suddenly discovered it. They were simply not there mentally, and they crashed, and there was one survivor. So confirming that the correct runway, make sure your heading bug is on the correct runway. And as a result of that accident, I believe that they changed the rules for the tower controllers, and you cannot just have one controller on duty in the tower because the controller on duty didn't call out and say, hey, come here, you're on the wrong runway. So it could happen. Then, what to do if something fails? Have a plan. Have you ever practiced an aborted takeoff? It's different. I try to do this with all my clients. Practice an aborted takeoff at a safe, slow speed. I advise the tower, ask them if we can practice an abort, and maybe at 20 or 30 knots, pull the power back and apply the brakes. I don't slam on the brakes. We apply the brakes, bringing the airplane to a stop under control. High-speed aborts have led to accidents. They're not pretty. So it's something to think about. Have a plan. If something goes wrong, what are you going to do? And then after takeoff, if something goes wrong, if you're down low, straight ahead, you don't have time to, at altitude to turn back. If you're higher, and there was a video on this many years ago, I believe Barry Schiff did, a proficient pilot, dating myself. Typically between 700 and 1,000 feet, depending on the aircraft, you might have time altitude to make the turn back. Below it, you really don't. So turning within 30 degrees of your heading of the runway. Um, Something else, what's called a takeoff alternate. If you haven't heard this term before, the airlines use it. What it amounts to is if you take off from an airport and the weather's IFR and you have a problem after takeoff, whatever it might be, can you return to the airport you just departed from? If you take off and the weather's very low, you cannot get back in. So where do we go? Having a plan B, what is an nearby airport, 30 minutes to an hour away, depending on fuel and all that. Hopefully you've got the fuel, but anyway, what's a suitable airport that you can fly and approach and land if you've had a problem and you need to put it back on the ground? So anyway, having a plan, that's all. Depends on what you're flying, et cetera, how you're equipped, all that sort of thing. So what we call killer items, after you're cleared for takeoff, so depending on the airplane, flaps, are they set correctly? Is the fuel in the correct tank? Is the trim set? Are the lights all on? They should be for takeoff. Is pitot heat, is there any limitation? On some aircraft, turbine aircraft, there is. Ignition if it's turbine. HSI or DG, do you have a heading bug? Set it. And the altitude, or rather transponder on altitude. Now, if you're in a Cirrus, they automatically activate it, and some others they will. But anyway, making sure. And the killer items I learned years ago from another crew member. We were in a hurry. He said, killer items, flaps, fuel, trim. What could kill you if it's not set right? And on some airplanes, if the flaps aren't set right, you won't get airborne. If the trim is setting correctly, you won't, control is going to be an issue. If the fuel's not in the correct tank, that's going to be a problem. So lights on. If the lights aren't on, that won't be a problem, but you may not be seen. Anyway, making sure things are properly set before you go. Takeoff roll. Do you do takeoff callouts? Typically at the airline level or any turbine aircraft, large aircraft, power set, airspeed alive, and if you've got two sets of flight instruments on larger aircraft, making sure pilot, co-pilot airspeed indicators are both working, engine instruments in the green, no annunciators. That's what we're looking for. And to this, I will add the Sparky-Imison rule of thumb. If you're not familiar, if halfway down the runway you aren't at 70% of your rotation speed aboard the takeoff, that's from his Mountain Flying Handbook. Anyway, if the airplane's not accelerating properly, reject the takeoff. There was an accident attributed to this. I'll go back 50 years, Chicago, Meigs Field, being a Chicago native, and many years ago on a winter day, a Falcon 10 attempted to depart Meigs Field, snowy runway. The crew did not they were not accelerating properly. They did nothing about it. They went off the end into the lake. Everyone died. In the ensuing investigation, it was discovered that they attempted to take off with the parking brake set. Yes, with the parking brake set. So something was overlooked on the checklist. I actually had a client in the simulator one time who attempted to take off with a parking brake set, and he couldn't understand why it was accelerating so slowly. And I just sat there and watched and waited to see what he would do. He kept commenting, gosh, it's not accelerating. I didn't say anything. Let's see what he's going to do. He finally staggered into the air, made it around, came back in and landed. What's the problem? I said, you decide, you tell me what the problem was. He finally discovered he had taken off with the parking brake set. Hello? Acceleration was very slow, and it did not occur to him to abort the takeoff. So if it doesn't look right, feel right, smell right, reject the takeoff. Better to do that than to, go down the runway thinking what's wrong. Uh, Takeoff profile. What's the climb profile for the airplane you're flying? Best angle, best rate. How do you do it for the airplane that you fly? And here in Southern California, lots of curfews for noise and noise sensors around the airport. So, Long Beach, John Wayne, Torrance, all of them. Does the airport have a departure and noise abatement procedure? Know what that is. And sometimes at the departure into the runway, they'll have a reminder for pilots after takeoff, fly this setting or avoid overflying this or that. When to reduce power, when to clean up. Typically, at 1,000 feet, when you reach traffic pattern altitude, you make a set, from cruise power to your decline power. Depends what you're flying. Per the AFM, when to raise the flaps, that sort of thing. Refer to the airplane flight manual for the aircraft that you're flying. But just things to consider. After takeoff, So single pilot, when do you turn on the autopilot? So this is where you need to go into the supplement for your autopilot. Um, should be possibly an AFM and see what it says. When can you engage the autopilot? In some airplanes, there's nothing mentioned. In other for other autopilots, it will say 500 feet or 800 feet. Depends on the manufacturer. So, or do you hand fly up to altitude? What is your technique for this? And what are the limitations for the airplane that you are flying? And if you haven't looked at this, look it up in your avionics supplements. It should be there. So I believe for Garmin, it's for the 500. I believe it might be 800 feet. I have to look because every airplane I get in has a different autopilot, literally. This goes back to the days I was flying a Metroliner. My age is showing back in the 80s. So call outs. So in a noisy turboprop, climbing to 4,000, we when we would go through 1,000 to go, we'd hold up a finger, three for four, one to go. 500 feet, hold up a hand, 500 to go, 200 feet. That would reinforce altitude awareness and prevent altitude bust. We were flying 8 legs a day, hand flying, if you can believe that. So, and in fact, there's a story that back in the day, dating myself, US Air, long ago, back in the 80s, they had a large route structure in the East Coast and many short flights, and they had a record number of altitude busts way back when. So the company's solution, as I recall, it was explained the non-flying pilot, when he would receive from ATC an altitude change, he would reach up to the flight guidance panel and put it there, and he would hold his hand there, finger there, until the flying pilot looked and acknowledged, okay, we are now leveling up at 5,000, not 6,000 as an example, but they both had to agree that that was the new altitude. So instead of just acknowledging it, they both had to understand that was the new altitude. If you're in busy airspace, that can happen. So just reinforcing whatever your altitude is on a climb or descent, and especially in turbine aircraft, when you're climbing at 1,000, 2,000 feet a minute, this can happen very quickly. Am I 150? This is not an issue, but still, it can come up. So anyway, 500 to go, 200 to go. It just reinforces it. So you're flying along a cruise. Do you have a scan? Depends on your airplane. There's a gentleman, long retired from US Air, Tom Block, used to write for Flying Magazine. And one of his methods, techniques, every 20 minutes, he would go left to right in his cockpit. How is everything set? So what do you look at? You've got glass or steam or hybrid, some combination. What are you looking at while you're flying along to check that your navigation is good, your fuel is good, um, et cetera, et cetera. Systems are all working. How are the engines? So check and see. Depends whether you got steam or glass, and it's going to be different. Is it Avidyne, Garmin, Dynon? And do you hand fly or use the autopilot? How is it trimmed? All these things. And even, gosh, if you're on course, has the wind changed? Do you have a wind correction angle for your course? How much of a wind correction angle are you holding? Are you 10, 20, 30 degrees, you know, different between heading and course to stay on course? So what's going on with the weather? So anyway, en route scan, some method, periodically looking left or right, because one of the problems with automation is people tend to kick back and go, okay, it's got it. Well, you're flying the airplane, it's a slave and you're the master, as I like to think of it. So make sure everything is doing what it should be. You want to avoid big surprises. So little surprises we can deal with. We want to avoid big surprises. And how do you manage fuel? If you're flying something low-wing, Beechcraft, Piper, Mooney, you'll be changing tanks depending on every 30 minutes, every hour, how much fuel, how far you're going. In the 100 series Cessnas, like the 150, 172, 182, typically the fuel's on both. If you move up to the 210 something, then you've got left and right. So how do you manage fuel depending on where you're going? If it's a short flight, it may not be a problem. If it's a longer flight, you'll be changing tanks. So, and how much can there be a fuel imbalance at all? Depends on the airplane. So how do you manage fuel and what you're flying? And from the NTSB, within fuel-related accidents, fuel exhaustion and fuel starvation. So fuel exhaustion, two different things. It means the airplane has completely run out of usable fuel. Somebody didn't plan right, or they overflew a stop because they wanted to get home, so that they didn't stop for fuel and then they ran out. Fuel starvation means there's fuel in a tank that did not get to the engine. So what happened? You forgot to change tanks, or there was a mechanical problem with the fuel lines, but fuel starvation, there's fuel on board, but it didn't get to the tank. So how do you manage fuel in the airplane you're flying? But fuel exhaustion, 56% of fuel-related actions. So poor planning or get there itis. You're overflying when you should have stopped for fuel. And yes, a fuel stop is going to take you 10, 20, 30, or however long, depending where you go. Um, it's something to consider. How many tanks do you have? Do you switch tanks? How much fuel do you want to land with? The regs require what? Gosh, only 30 minutes during the, 30 minutes during the day. Anyway, making sure, I think much better when I've got 1 hour of fuel on landing. So the regs are a minimum. So 30 minutes at night, 45, not nearly enough. Most airlines, corporate, et cetera, want at least 1 hour on board for landing. IFR, destination, alternate plus 45. So don't cut it close. And the reserve is there in case you have unexpected runway closure or something like that, disabled aircraft on the runway. Who knows what it might be? In fact, gosh, many years ago, flying scheduled airline from Anchorage back to Kenai, unexpected aircraft um, stopped on the runway, blown tire. It took them about a half an hour to get the airplane off the runway, so I couldn't land on a runway that was partially closed. So I waited 30 minutes until they had the aircraft removed. So that's where your reserve fuel comes in. I elected to do that instead of turning around back to Anchorage. Anyway, that's why you need it for contingencies when you don't know what might happen. Approach and landing. So depending, individual thing, how much time and experience do you have in the airplane you're flying? Make and model. This is a big insurance thing. If you're not familiar with this, the airlines refer to this as Hi-Man captain or baby captain when you upgrade to captain. So you've been in the right seat, now you're moving to the left seat. Part 121 calls for adding 100 feet, 1/2 mile to the required ceiling and visibility for the approach till you have 100 hours in the left seat. Hi-Man's captain. So the lowest that they can do is fly 301 approach until they've got time in the 100 hours in the seat, and then they're off of Hi-Mans. So when you're new to an airplane, you can apply the same thinking, be conservative until you get used to everything, avionics, the view out the window, how it's looking. Give yourself higher minimums until you get time in the airplane and get comfortable with it. And insurance companies are really big on this, very conservative. What are you stepping up to? And this is where the mentor pilots come in handy, checking out in turbine airplanes, especially flying with a more experienced pilot for 50 or 100 hours, and maybe until you're very proficient, until they can turn you loose. So this is largely insurance driven. Uh, if your load time less than 250, you might run into some serious issues with the insurance. They might spell out whatever initial or recurrent training requirements, less than 500 hours. It says complete 100 hours of training. So these are all insurance driven, landing minimums, and initially no less than 802 for non-precision, 602 for ILS. So it depends on the insurance company, but runway required must be 30% longer than what's required. So if you need, 1,000 feet to land, they want to see a runway 30% longer. And crosswinds less than 10 knots. Very conservative. In other words, allowing yourself adequate runway, more than adequate, good weather. So until you've got time in the airplane and you're more comfortable with it. How many pilots brief and approach at the airline level? We do this, and callouts. So anyway, you complete this while you're at cruise. The approach could change your destination. That's not uncommon. Flying on autopilot, check the ATIS, or if you're going to an airport without an ATIS, it's a ASOS, what we call the 1 minute weather because it gets updated frequently. What approach is in use? So, and then with the approach plate, check the, confirm the runway. If there's two of you, make sure you both have the same approach plate. What's the date on the approach plate? Making sure it's current, top, and then left to right at the top, starting out with, pertinent information, elevation, touchdown zone elevation, the localizer course or the inbound course, frequencies, looking at the plan views on top, the profile views on the bottom, different minimums, all that stuff, whatever is appropriate, noting obstacles, like what I call the killer notes. Um, does it require, if you go down below standard published minimums, say, um, it might require the use of a flight director if the touchdown RVR is 1,800 feet. So these are all spelled out on the approach plate. Jepson presents a little bit different than NOS, but just looking at it and finding all of the appropriate information for a given airport. When to configure depends on the airplane. You may or may not have flaps. The gear could be fixed, but there's something called a glide slope schedule that I first heard many years ago. Simply when the glide slope, and this is an older, as you can tell, HSI, but when the glide slope indicator begins to move, glide slope alive is the call out between one dot, and when it's one dot down, you might go flaps approach. How many flap settings on your airplane? Um, when the glide slope centers, gear down, think gear down, go down, landing flaps. So what applies to the airplane you're flying? And for some airplanes, you don't select landing flaps until landing is assured. You can go around safely if the flaps are at approach, um, depending on your airplane. But anyway, as the glide slope is moving to intercept, you configure your airplane gradually as you're doing this. For non-precision, cross the final approach fix, flaps at half, or whatever your airplane flight manual recommends. Gear down if it's a retract. Descend to the MDA at or before the missed approach point, what we sometimes call dive and drive, descending down at a quick rate, then leveling off. Landing flaps where landing is assured. A stabilized approach. So when you're en route, you might be descending at greater than 1,000 feet a minute. When you're on the approach, limited to between 500 and 1,000 to get down there and stabilized. Stabilized approaches lead to better landings, safer landings. If it's not stabilized, go around. At the airline level, if a large aircraft jet is not stabilized by 500 feet with some carriers, mandatory go around. So things to consider. If you're in a small single engine airplane, it's easy to recover, but if it's not stabilized, take it around. Call outs when you're on the approach, similar to this, 1,000 above, 500 above, approaching minimums, approach lights are runway in sight at what clock position, 11, 12, 1. No runway missed approach. So it's just creating altitude awareness. If you're single pilot, call this out to yourself. And depending on the runway you're going into and the approach lights, the precision approaches with the lower minimums have more extensive approach lighting. If you go to a smaller rural airport with maybe only one VFR approach, the approach lighting won't be nearly, it'll be much simpler. They go out between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. ALFS 1 and 2 are the most sophisticated. Some small airports might only have a runway and identifier light. It depends on the airport. But just being aware of your altitude while you're on the approach and your descent, and if you're not, be ready for the missed approach. You should plan to miss the approach every time. That way you're not surprised and know what your missed approach flow is. And depending on your avionics, if you've got Garmin, it will present a display suspend or not suspend because the Garmin doesn't know if you've landed or you're going missed approach. So suspend auto sequencing if you land, and if you're on the missed approach, depending on your avionics, you might have to climb and turn before you go to your missed approach hold. So it depends on the situation, but just being aware of what the avionics might tell you. Good rules of thumb here. How many times to fly an approach after a missed approach? Suggestion limited to 2. Anybody can goof up one time, bad vector, you don't get configured, something, but then the get there itis can unfortunately influence your thinking. Recommendation, depending on the weather and the fuel, what's the weather doing? Is it improving? Is it staying the same? How much fuel do you have? Try one more attempt, and if that doesn't work, now you're burning in your alternate fuel. Do not continue to attempt it. There have been accidents where somebody attempted an approach three times, four times, five times. They really want to get there. Now they're not thinking straight. Divert to your alternate so you can land at your alternate with plenty of fuel. Better to be on the ground. Do not continue to try. How low can you go? Under 91, 175. Some of these any of these markings, you need to see the threshold or markings or lights, runway identifier lights, touchdown zone, runway markings. Um, so you can descend down to from the DH 100 feet above the touchdown zone if you have some of these lights. And in fact, it was almost 100 years ago, back in the early 1930s, when Bob Buck, who wrote Weather Flying, they were doing experimentation and trying to figure out what kind of lighting they needed to transition from being on the approach to the runway. And he actually went up there and they put him up 200 feet, and he was up there going, what kind of lights would it take so I can safely transition in my DC-3 back then to the runway and have enough suitable visibility and lighting to lead me to the runway? So this is literally almost 100 years old, and this is how it's evolved. And you can always tell the precision runways have much more markings and lighting than a small rural airport with maybe just an NDB dating myself, VOR approach. So the more extensive the lighting and the runway markings, it'll be a precision approach with lower minimums than a non-towered, rural airport that has maybe one approach. Um, and then do you take an instructor or safety pilot with you? So something else to consider because they're looking outside and you're inside. Alternate rule. So the 1, 2, 3 rule. When the destination is forecast to have something less than 2,000, visibility, 2003 for 1 hour before, 1 hour after, then we need the alternate. So for 91, um, the same rule. So for non-precision, 802, and this depends on the airport. If you look at the approach plate, it'll say, for not for it will have non-standard alternate minimums. In that case, you have to look and see maybe it's terrain in a mountainous country. It might have higher minimums or for some other reason. For a single runway airport, highly recommend have an alternate in case there's a runway closure for who knows what reason. So that way, if something happens, you can go, like Southern California, Corona's got a single runway and a VOR approach. Anyway, any single runway airport, you should have an alternate in mind in case something happens. It could. On landing, aim for the touchdown zone. That's where the glide slope is taking you to. So, and a big pet peeve, don't touch things on the runway. When you're landing and rolling out, concentrate on airplane control, getting it on the ground, especially in a windy day, crosswind condition, getting it on, tracking the ground, firmly applying crosswind correction. Do not be in a hurry to raise flaps. You could reach for the wrong thing. All that kind of stuff. So wait until you're clear to start touching anything, regardless of how well you know your airplane. Who knows, you could reach the wrong thing. Airplane control is primary, especially on contaminated, wet, or icy runways. Apply the braking as needed. You can do aerodynamic braking as well. Granted, if you're on a short runway, you might need to, for the POH, retract the flaps for better braking. Just be careful. Gosh, in some older models of the Bonanza, whatever, flap and gear positions are switched until they standardized it. So make sure you're reaching for the flap handle and not something else, and slow it down to a safe speed before you attempt to exit the runway. Hopefully there's a high-speed taxiway, but don't put a side load on the tires by turning before slowing. So keep it under control. If you get into ground effect, you're going to float. That's another thing, but hopefully you get your speed under control and you can get it down in the touchdown zone and bring it safely, slow it down, clear the runway, cross the hold short line before you do anything else. Cross and hold short lines, call ground, and then clean up the airplane, flaps, lights as you need to, taxi to the ramp. And I will say this, before you shut it down, if you've gone into a non-towered airport and you are still on your IFR clearance, don't forget to cancel IFR. And when they clear you for the approach controller center will say report cancellation on the frequency or after on the ground, call this number. If you don't do that, they hold the airspace open. Ask me how I know. So a short story on that. I was in SkyWest Dispatch way back when in the 90s, and we had a SkyWest crew all day long, been flying in and out of Salt Lake City, tower controlled airport. The last flight of the night, they fly to St. George, non-towered. That's going to change, but back in the day, it wasn't. The crew, being used to landing at tower controlled airports, forgot to cancel IFR. The crew goes to the hotel. I get a call in dispatch from LA Center. Is SkyWest such and such on the ground? They have not canceled. Really? Okay. I said to the crew scheduling desk, what's the number for the hotel? I called the hotel, spoke with the captain. I was going to give him chew him out. Excuse me, sir, but very quick thinking captain. I said, Captain, this is dispatch. You're on the ground. You forgot you did not cancel IFR. His response was, I told the co-pilot to cancel, and he hung up. So I called back LA Center and said, SkyWest Dispatch, we've confirmed flight such and such is on the ground, spoke to the crew there at the hotel. They then released the airspace for the aircraft that wanted to fly the approach into SkyWest, and they were on the ground. They were able to continue. So ATC will hold the airspace if you don't cancel after you land, and nobody else can get in there because they've got to protect it for missed approaches. So it's important on your checklist to remember, cancel IFR when you're off the runway. I will also add this, if the weather's IFR, do not cancel once you break out, because as long as you're on an IFR clearance, then they've got the missed approach protected. If you cancel before you land and it's IFR and something goes wrong, now you're in trouble. So if that made sense, if it's IFR and you break out and suddenly something goes wrong, you can't go missed approach if you've canceled because now you're VFR. So land, clear the runway, and then cancel. Hope that made sense. Parking and shutdown checklist, follow that, secure the airplane. So I have to thank, this goes back a while, IFR Magazine, which is no longer being published. They shut it down last spring. Elaine Kaw, who wrote about using SOPs in GA. That was originally published. It's in archive mode on their website. Max Trescott, friend of mine, hosts Aviation News Talk, discussed this years ago. And IFR, the last comment, they shut it down along with some other publications. So you can go to the website, find back issues, but they're no longer publishing it. Anyway, thank you for your attendance. Hopefully this has been worthwhile and informative. Hopefully I've explained it clearly. My website is there. My email is there. Laura.
Can you pop up? Thank you, John, for a great presentation. Can you pop up the question, or I'm sorry, the slide that has your contact information on it?
Oh gosh, how do I
Just go back.
let me go.
Yeah, go click there, right there.
There we go.
That's
Sorry.
perfect. No worries. You're good.
My first time through this. Anyway,
Yeah, it's his first rodeo, and I think he's done a great job. So,
thank you.
yeah, actually, someone just chimed in right now and said, best webinar in a long time. Useful. Thanks, Mr. Mahaney. So there you go.
Thank you.
Questions. Ed is wondering, and when he's looking to do his instrument check right, if I understand this correctly. He's wondering which SOPs he should have memorized versus ones he can read from a checklist. He said when he got his PPL, he didn't have to have anything memorized, but he's hearing there's more of a push towards memorization.
Oh, boy, that's it depends. One of my favorite answers is it depends. So it depends on what he's flying, what the checklist is, and some of this is technique, but my recommendations on these things are how to do things in what order. If he wants, I actually have two or three documents that I've made up for PIC clients that are John Mahaney's, not PIC's, but anyway, and I have some recommendations for things. So these are only recommendations. They're generally accepted industry practices. If he sends me an email or something, I can reply with, here's a suggestion for some SOPs, generally speaking, but they're airplane specific. If you fly a Bonanza, if you fly a Mooney, you fly a Centurion, they're going to be different depending on what you fly. So, and depending on your avionics, of course. So it's very specific depending on what you have, the airplane, and that sort of thing is just to make sure that you've got everything set correctly. But if somebody sends me an email, I can respond and send them the document that I've created that I give to PIC clients. They're stuff that I've made up just based on experience. They generally apply, and you have to customize it to what you're doing.
David was wanting a little clarification on when turning all of your lights on at takeoff, does that include the taxi lights?
Yeah, I would, yes. So, because at the airline level, they turn everything on. So the taxi light only for taxi, but on the runway, turn everything on. That way, everyone can see you. And it will typically, well, on some aircraft, it extinguishes when you put the gear up. If it's fixed gear, if that's the only light you have, keep it on. I keep the landing light on my 150 on all the time in LA. That way, people can see me. So, but yes, that includes the taxi light.
All right. Greg is wondering if you recommend the challenge response technique for seldom used emergency checklists.
Well, for single pilot, verbalizing. So challenges, right. So I would say, yeah, I mean, for single pilot, I tell people verbalize everything. If there's two of you, yeah, so that's a technique thing, but referencing that you're calling it out, you're doing it, and then you're confirming it. So yes, that's a technique, but yes.
And Juan says he's been working on his SOPs for a while now. Is there some place you can find a good all-inclusive template that you could start from and then personalize?
Oh gosh, I will say mine is based on experience. So whether like the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, some FAA pubs are probably going to have, that's actually a good question. There's probably industry references, and depending on whether you're like, depending what you're flying, maybe for Bonanza owners, ABS might have something, or for the Cessna group, depending on the airplane. Mine are simply based on experience. So what airplane are you in, and that sort of thing, and how your avionics set up. That's really going to determine. But there's probably some industry guidance on that. So maybe AOPA has something.
Yeah, and I know the second video that I showed during our pre-webinar was something from the Department of the Interior, and they showed, kind of screenshots of their SOPs.
Right.
Maybe Mr. Google has the answer.
No, seriously, yeah, there's all kind of industry things now that we didn't used to have. So it could be something like that. Yeah.
And just a couple of quick housekeeping things. People are wondering about their wings credit. If you have been on this session for at least 50 minutes, you will receive wings credit automatically by the end of the week. Also, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, which is Saturday Morning Coffee and Wings, also by the end of the week. And then Joseph is wondering if you could show the slide with the regulation on alternate destination requirements.
Okay, let me go back.
And along those lines, another attendee stated that, or wondered what you felt about the practice he was taught, which is no matter what the weather, you always choose an alternate. So if the weather changes or if things go downhill, you have a plan.
Oh, that's simply good. Now I have to say there's somewhere I worked many years ago, they didn't have that, but as a good practice, always have an alternate in mind and with all my clients because you really never know when something might come up. And especially if you're on the way en route, not yet at your destination, where can I land within the nearest 50 miles or something? So always having something in mind in case, gosh, passengers suddenly, I have to use the bathroom, sickness, who knows, you might get smoke in the cockpit. So you should always have an alternate in mind, even though one is not formally declared. And by the way, ATC does not know what your alternate is. They don't get that in your flight plan. That's why they say intentions. So you can change your alternate. There's no problem with that. What you file and what you do are two different things.
So Jeffrey just commented on a lot of VORs being decommissioned, GPS jamming, concerns about that. Um, we are having on October, let me pull up the date super quick. On October 11th, we're going to have a Saturday morning webinar on the VOR Minimal Operations Network so that people can learn about what's going on with how our nav aids are changing and how those situations are being handled.
Actually, Laura, that's really good. I need to watch that one because we've got four VORs out here in LA, and now they're putting a note on the low altitude charts for IFR that MON, minimum operational network. So I really do want to watch that to see. I actually asked a briefer one time. He goes, guess what? Due to parts shortages and stuff, they aren't repairing some of these. He explained the long process. So this is going to become more common. So you really need GPS because they're not maintaining these. They're old and parts are an issue.
Yes, that can be a problem too. And the people that are doing the webinar actually help develop the network. So it should be really good.
That's that's in October. I hope to make that one.
You'll get an invite for it and it'll have all the
That,
description.
that just that's very important because it's a question I have. Like, so I'd like to learn more. Yeah,
Well, and that kind of fits along the road of all of us are student pilots because we're always all learning.
exactly.
Lots of people have really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
And I'm just scrolling through the last minute stuff. We got the,
Well,
oh,
thank you.
oh,
I'm
Andy's
hoping to.
wondering if you still do IFR training.
Oh, I do. I'm doing it in owner airplanes, not rental airplanes, because somebody like me as an independent isn't welcome inside a flight school like her or you. So if somebody has an airplane, yes, but for renters that are typically from a flight school, that doesn't work because it's like they don't like independent guys. So anyway, but yes, so they can get in touch with me.
All right, let's see what else we've got here in our last couple of minutes. And I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, John, but it's an interesting question. Curtis is wondering how can he get access to IFR magazine now that they're no longer publishing them?
They shut it down. You'd have to go to their website, IFR. I think I was there recently. They have back issues that are archived, and maybe you can print stuff out. No, it was what I'm told is that basically the publisher, for whatever reason, somebody else took aviation consumer, safety, kit planes, a number of these has been shut down. So you have to go to the website to find a back issue, unless, I mean, I've got back issues, but they suspended this back in the spring. So it's unfortunate. A lot of good information there. I carry some issues when I travel and train because they've got stuff in there that you won't find elsewhere. But the website has back issues and you can print out articles that way. So this is, way above my pay grade. So someone decided shut them down. So no more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's above my pay grade too.
The
Uh,
sign of the times, unfortunately.
yeah. Roberts was one, he wants to get your thoughts on flows followed by checklists versus just going straight to the checklist.
Well, the way you do it, initially follow the checklist step by step. After a while, you do, maybe I didn't clarify this, you do the flow and then back it up with the checklist. So once you've got experience in a given airplane, you can do the flow and then the checklist, making sure that everything is done. So that's the way it would be.
And then while we, say our goodbyes and see you next week, a couple people would like to see your contact information again.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I got to go the other way here.
Yeah, that way. There you go.
Sorry.
All right, there's his contact information for all of you. Any last comments, John, before we sign off for the morning?
I enjoyed doing this. I look forward to doing another one. So we'll figure that out. But I'm glad. Hopefully, it's well received and helpful to people and that sort of thing. So trying to this is all industry practices, but some instructors do this and some don't. So trying to just fill in the gaps. So
All right. Thank you so much, John. Thanks everyone for attending.
you're welcome.
Look forward to seeing everyone next week. Fly safe and remember, you can always go around. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.